I am documenting what may represent the most vulnerable and strategically critical infrastructure system in human history, one that carries 95% of global internet traffic, yet remains largely invisible to public consciousness and policy attention until the moment it fails catastrophically. As I analyze intelligence reports on systematic submarine cable reconnaissance, deliberate infrastructure targeting, and the asymmetric warfare potential of undersea cable sabotage, I recognize that we have created a civilization dependent upon a communications infrastructure so fragile and so poorly defended that its disruption represents an existential threat to modern economic and political systems, and hostile powers have positioned themselves to exploit this vulnerability with devastating effect. The global internet infrastructure that enables everything from financial transactions to military communications depends fundamentally on approximately 420 submarine fiber optic cables spanning ocean floors worldwide, carrying data at speeds approaching the speed of light through glass fibers no thicker than human hair. These cables, each representing investments of hundreds of millions of dollars in years of planning, create the physical backbone that connects continents and enables the instantaneous global communication that modern civilization takes for granted. What intelligence analysts find most alarming is not just the concentration of critical communications through these cables, but the systematic reconnaissance and positioning activities that suggest hostile powers have developed comprehensive capabilities to disrupt or monitor this infrastructure at will. Russian naval activities around submarine cables have escalated beyond routine intelligence gathering and entered what Western defense analysts classify as preparation for infrastructure warfare. The Yantar, a Russian naval vessel officially designated for deep-sea research, has been tracked conducting systematic surveys of submarine cable routes in the North Atlantic, Baltic Sea, and Mediterranean, using submersibles and underwater drones to map cable locations with precision that serves no legitimate research purpose. Intelligence assessments indicate that Russian naval units have developed specialized capabilities for accessing submarine cables without surface detection, including the ability to install monitoring devices or place explosive charges that could be activated remotely during periods of heightened tension. What makes submarine cable infrastructure particularly vulnerable is the impossible geometry of protecting thousands of miles of undersea communications lines that traverse international waters where no single nation maintains sovereignty or comprehensive surveillance coverage. The transatlantic cables connecting North America and Europe pass through ocean depths where traditional naval patrols provide no meaningful protection, while the cables linking Asia and North America cross Pacific routes that span distances too vast for conventional monitoring. Unlike terrestrial infrastructure, which can be secured through military installations and surveillance systems, submarine cables operate in an environment where detection of hostile activity requires specialized deep-sea capabilities that few nations possess. The economic implications of submarine cable disruption extend far beyond internet connectivity and into the core mechanisms of global finance and international commerce. High-frequency trading, which accounts for the majority of daily financial market transactions, depends on latency differences measured in milliseconds, meaning that transatlantic financial communications require the direct fiber optic connections that submarine cables provide. The cables connecting London and New York financial markets carry an estimated $5 trillion in daily trading volume, while disruption of Pacific cables linking Asian and American markets could halt approximately $3 trillion in daily commerce. These are not theoretical vulnerabilities. They represent single points of failure that could trigger immediate economic crisis affecting billions of people worldwide. China's role in submarine cable infrastructure presents a different but equally concerning strategic challenge through their systematic positioning in cable manufacturing, installation, and maintenance contracts that provide ongoing access to critical communications infrastructure. Huawei Marine Networks, recently rebranded as HMN Tech, has secured contracts for submarine cable projects spanning continents, including cables serving NATO member nations and critical U.S. military installations. The technical requirements of submarine cable maintenance provide legitimate justification for regular access to cable infrastructure, but this same access enables monitoring, data collection, or sabotage activities that would be undetectable without sophisticated technical countermeasures that most nations have not implemented. I am tracking patterns of cable failures and disruptions that suggest testing or reconnaissance activities designed to assess response capabilities and impact assessment without triggering full-scale international incidents. The Nord Stream pipeline explosions demonstrated that critical infrastructure sabotage can occur in heavily monitored waters without immediate attribution or effective prevention, and submarine cables present far more challenging protection and attribution problems than pipeline infrastructure. Recent cable cuts in the Baltic Sea, Red Sea, and Mediterranean have been attributed to ship anchors or fishing activities, but the frequency and locations of these incidents align with patterns that intelligence analysts associate with deliberate testing rather than accidental damage. The technical sophistication required for submarine cable sabotage has decreased significantly as deep-sea technology becomes more accessible through commercial and research applications. Autonomous underwater vehicles capable of reaching cable depths are now available through civilian contractors, while the technical knowledge required to locate and access submarine cables can be obtained through legitimate marine engineering training. This democratization of deep-sea capabilities means that cable infrastructure faces threats not only from major power military units, but also from proxy forces, terrorist organizations, or commercial entities operating under state sponsorship with plausible civilian cover. NATO's collective defense framework proves inadequate for addressing submarine cable attacks due to attribution difficulties and the unclear application of Article 5 mutual defense commitments to infrastructure attacks that may not definitively qualify as armed attack under traditional definitions. A sophisticated submarine cable attack could disable military communications, disrupt financial systems, and isolate entire regions from global internet connectivity while providing the attacking nation with plausible deniability and avoiding the clear threshold for military response that territorial attacks or direct violence against personnel would trigger. This creates what strategic analysts term a gray zone attack vector that provides maximum impact with minimal risk of conventional retaliation. The concentration of global internet traffic through a small number of critical cable routes creates vulnerability amplification effects where disruption of key cables produces cascading failures across global communications networks. The cables connecting major internet exchange points in London, New York, Hong Kong, and Singapore carry disproportionate percentages of global traffic, meaning that strategic targeting of specific cable routes could isolate entire continents from global internet connectivity. Recovery from major cable disruption requires specialized cable repair ships that exist in limited numbers globally and require weeks or months to complete repairs in deep ocean environments, creating extended vulnerability periods during which alternate communications would be severely degraded. Intelligence communities have been developing countermeasures for submarine cable protection, but the scale and environment of cable infrastructure makes comprehensive protection extremely challenging from both technical and economic perspectives. Distributed cable routing that provides redundancy against single cable failures requires massive additional investment in infrastructure that private companies have limited incentive to provide, while military protection of cable routes requires naval capabilities and sustained operational commitments that strain defense budgets and operational capacity. The most sophisticated protection systems under development involve continuous monitoring of cable routes using autonomous underwater vehicles and seabed sensor networks. But implementing these systems across global cable networks requires international cooperation and sustained funding that current political frameworks struggle to coordinate effectively. The intersection of submarine cable vulnerability with other critical infrastructure dependencies creates systemic risks that compound beyond individual cable failures into civilizational scale communication breakdown. Modern electrical grid management, transportation coordination, financial systems, and government communications all depend on reliable internet connectivity that submarine cable disruption could eliminate simultaneously across multiple continents. Unlike cyber attacks, which target software vulnerabilities that can be patched or defended through technical countermeasures, submarine cable attack targets physical infrastructure that cannot be rapidly replaced or bypassed without massive economic and logistical commitments that exceed current emergency response capabilities. What concerns me most in this analysis is the strategic calculation that submarine cable warfare provides hostile powers with a first strike capability against global communications infrastructure that could be implemented rapidly, simultaneously across multiple targets, and with sufficient impact to fundamentally alter the strategic balance of any subsequent conflict. The nation that achieves comprehensive submarine cable attack capability gains the ability to isolate enemy nations from global communications while preserving their own connectivity, creating information and coordination advantages that could determine the outcome of both economic and military conflicts before traditional military capabilities become relevant. The private sector ownership of most submarine cable infrastructure creates coordination gaps between commercial interests and national security requirements that increase systemic vulnerability. Cable companies optimize for cost efficiency and service reliability under normal operating conditions, while national security requires redundancy and protection against deliberate attack that commercial markets do not price effectively. Government regulation of submarine cable security remains limited due to the international nature of cable routes and the technical complexity of deep-sea infrastructure that most regulatory frameworks are not equipped to address comprehensively. As I conclude this analysis, I recognize that submarine cable infrastructure represents a perfect storm of strategic vulnerability, economic dependency, and protection challenges that hostile powers are positioned to exploit for maximum strategic advantage with minimal risk of retaliation or attribution. The global communications infrastructure that enables modern civilization operates through a physical network so vulnerable and so poorly protected that its disruption could trigger immediate economic crisis, communications breakdown, and strategic paralysis, affecting billions of people simultaneously. The decisions made about submarine cable security, redundancy, and protection over the next decade will determine whether this critical infrastructure serves as a foundation for continued global integration or becomes a weapon that hostile powers use to fragment and control the digital foundation of modern society.